Chapter 6. Their First Quarrel. And so the reading lessons began. The very next night, I came home about 4:30. All right, I was testing to see if he would really know that I was home, and found him already sitting on the couch, the morning's newspaper spread across his lap, his finger running along the columns. "Samwise," I said, "you're early." "There's nothing about cats in here," he said, ignoring the greeting. "I know that word, and I've been looking for it. It's not here." I put my coat over an easy chair. Newspapers rarely have anything about cats in them. Rarely? He was skeptical. "Well, people read newspapers, and they like to read about themselves. If cats read, then maybe the newspaper would have more stories about them." All that said with a straight face. "Anyway, we need to start with something simpler than a newspaper." I got the briefcase with my literacy materials from beside my desk and took a seat beside him on the couch, and we got started. He made rapid progress. In a few days, he was reading newspapers, and soon we were making forays into some of the simpler novels and short stories I had in my literacy kit. Although I praised his quickness in learning, I was secretly feeling pretty smug. No one learned to read that fast. His charade was revealed. Samwise must have known how to read all along. I had to marvel at the verisimilitude of his performance, though. He never seemed to drop out of character. Cat become man. Though he made no direct reference to his being Shadow for a couple of weeks. One day, I came home to find him on the carpet in front of the fireplace, surrounded by a dozen books he'd hauled down from the shelves. He was so busy, he barely noticed me coming up the stairs. I smiled to myself, changed my clothes, and joined him on the floor. Sam was exacerbated. "I don't understand this," he said, without bothering to say hello. "The knowledge of cats is organized. It makes sense. First, there are the things seen and unseen. Among the seen things, there are some that kill, some that feed, and some that wait to be eaten. Among those that wait to be eaten, there are those that fly and those that scurry. Among the unseen things—" Discouraged that we were regressing deeper into his cat-man fantasy, I interrupted. "The knowledge of people is organized too. There are just more categories. What's the problem?" "You said that some books are about the truth and others are just stories. But how about this?" he said, holding up my tooled leather copy of The Lord of the Rings. "One summer during college I worked at a resort waiting tables. At night, most of the other kids went someplace and got drunk or got laid, or both. This one guy was like me, not part of the crowd. He would read The Lord of the Rings aloud in the dark of our dormitory. We giggled at the funny parts and shivered at the scary parts. We had a wonderful time. At the end of the summer, he gave me the book." "Middle-earth?" Sam was saying. "Of course, I've heard tales about that, and I think I remember that Mordor is in one of the old tales, and fairies and wizards are in the category of unseen things. But what is a hobbit? And spiders are never as big as Shelob. It would break the rules of the Great Spirits, and no one dares to do that. But if some parts are the truth, why are the others just stories?" "Actually," I said, "most people would say that it is all just stories. Fairies and wizards, well, people don't have any actual experience with them, at least no experience they would call real." I let out a long sigh, wondering if we would ever get past his fantasy. "I'm sorry," he said, putting his arm around me. "I didn't mean to make you feel stupid." He hugged me close. It was only natural to put my arms around him, if only to keep my balance. His arms felt strong, and he was quite lovely being close to him like this. With all our lessons and occasional dinners, we'd never gotten beyond being side by side, touching arms or legs, maybe, but not like this, being close enough to feel the breath flowing in and out of his chest. I raised my head to see how he was reacting to all of this, and there was his neck right in front of my eyes. The wild smell of him was stronger up this close, and I suppose I might have gotten a bit dizzy with it. In any case, I pulled myself a little closer and kissed him just below the ear, then nibbled on its lobe. Oh God, I'm so ready for this. His body was tense, and he backed away. "You bit me," he said. "Yes," I admitted, "but I kissed you first." "Kissed me," he said. "This is a kiss?" And he leaned over, nosed the hair away, and put his lips in almost exactly the same spot on my neck. It was pure electricity, unexpected, and quite powerful. Maybe that's why I panicked. I think maybe we should get back to our lesson, I said, casting my eye across the books, looking for salvation. Here's a good example of a book that is truth and just stories at the same time. I dared to look up. Sam's expression showed no trace of the amazing attraction I was feeling. If anything, he looked confused and perhaps a bit embarrassed. My excitement ebbed. I held up a paperback copy of Roots. The guy who wrote this traced his family all the way back to Africa, to the first of his kin who was taken as a slave. He tells about the generations of people who lived as slaves, and finally, how his family got to be free. "Tell me about these slaves. What are they?" Sam asked. Oh dear, we were deep into roleplay today. In some times and places, people bought and sold other people. The people who were bought were called slaves. They had to do whatever their owner said. They couldn't just do what they wanted. So is this book truth or just stories? Well, it's certainly not true in every detail. Alex Haley had no record of the conversations his great-grandparents had. He must have imagined that part. But the history, how white people went to Africa and took black people as slaves, that's true, I'm sorry to say. People did this? Yes, I said, and sometimes they still do. People have slaves right now? The emotion in his voice made the hairs on my neck twitch, and somehow I surmised that we weren't talking about Kunta Kinte anymore. I hope I pronounced that right. Yes, somewhere in the world. In the United States, they don't, or at least they would face punishment if they did. Slavery has been illegal here for more than 100 years. It's illegal most other places too. It's something we grew out of, I hope. It's no way to treat other people. How do people treat their slaves? He leaned forward. Well, I suppose you could read Roots. That would tell you the story better than I can. Basically, slaves were forced to work for their masters. Some owners were cruel and beat their slaves, raped the women, even killed them. But other owners were kind and generous. Even then, the slaves didn't have the freedom to work for someone else, or to get married, or to decide what kind of work they wanted to do. They basically couldn't leave the plantation they were sold to. Okay, a couple of things. One, he doesn't know what a plantation is. Two, you told him to read Roots and that you weren't going to describe it, and then you proceeded to describe it. Why on this fucking planet would you do that? Anyway, they couldn't leave the house? He said, with growing alarm. Actually, the plantation was bigger than a house. It included land and sometimes other buildings, like a barn or a backyard. I suppose, you see, someone owned them. Even if they went someplace, they had to come back, and usually they didn't go anywhere without the owner. My God, he said, I never thought it could be true. Something made me wait, wondering what this it might be, and after a while, he explained. Early in my first life, my mother told me how it was with cats. Our family were all cats who stayed with people, cats who lived inside. There were also cats who lived with animals, cats who lived outside. She said that cats who lived outside might try to live with people, but sooner or later they would have to leave. And cats who lived inside might find themselves outside sometimes, but they would always find a new person to live with. We were just two different kinds. It was a charming tale, but I was astonished at the degree of detail he was bringing to his role of this. Later, in my third or fourth life, Sam went on, I spent quite a bit of time outside before I found a person to go home with. I met some of the other cats, the ones who live with animals, and I heard different stories from them. They said cats who lived in houses were poor fools, that the people we lived with were owners. They brought us, and they bought us and turned us into slaves. We gave up our freedom in return for a warm place to sleep, they said. But you don't believe that, I said, hopefully. I didn't, he said. I'm so tired of the amount of times that they're saying said. It's just an annoying word. The people I lived with always seemed to be good people, kind and generous. I never thought of them as owners. I didn't think people would keep slaves. But now I know that they do. Now, Samwise, I said, caught up in the story in spite of myself, you can't compare those two things. People holding slaves and people keeping cats? My God, people are human beings after all. And cats are cats. How is it different? I shook my head. Well, I don't know how to explain something that's perfectly obvious. People are just more important. My God. You're trying to fuck this cat. Don't put it down like that. More important? People are better than cats? We were silent for a long while. I didn't know what to say. He seemed to have absorbed this fantasy about being a cat at the most profound level. I could still feel the place where his lips had touched my neck, and I didn't want him to be crazy. With all my heart, I didn't. But it was hard to avoid that conclusion. His next words gave me a bit of hope that he was at least detaching himself from the idea of being my cat. How did Shadow come to you? He said. Did you buy him? Well, there was an adoption fee at the SPCA. I suppose I could be described as a cat owner. That's how other people would see it, but I never think of Shadow as my slave. I let him do just about anything he wants to. Let him, he said, with a thin smile and an unspoken aha, emphasizing the let. But you don't let him go out, do you? Why, you start shouting if he even goes near an open door or window. Shadow, no! He mimicked me accurately. I have to keep him safe, I said. I'm responsible for him. Outside in the city is no place for cats. There's too much traffic. There are bad people. There are big dogs, and even raccoons in the park. Why the city is just barely safe for people? So then it would be safe for me? He asked. Exasperated with our little drama, I got to my feet and went to the closet. I'm going for a walk, I said. Our lesson is over for today. I was gone more than an hour. First, I just walked. Then, as my mind cleared, I did a bit of shopping. Just browsing, really. Looking in the used book bins at Green Apple, buying a donut and a cup of coffee, picking up the makings of a salad for dinner. As the gate to the building clanged behind me, my downstairs neighbor opened her door and greeted me. She was wearing a red velvet dressing gown, and her curly hair, in a color that matched almost exactly, was rather tousled. In other words, she looked like she had company. Lola was probably my age, but she considered herself much younger. Certainly her lifestyle was more daring. I felt certain that Lola was a nom de gru. Oh no, I can't. Okay, here's what we're gonna do. Because I don't want to embarrass myself when I'm actually recording. Okay, Google. Here we go. Okay, nom Nomdegere. Nomde. Okay, let's see. I don't recognize this word. An assumed name. Nomsdegere. That doesn't seem right. Nomdegere? Nomdegere. Interesting. Is that French? Yeah, French for literally. That's interesting. Okay. The more you know. Certainly her lifestyle was more daring. I felt certain that Lola was a nom de guerre. She'd probably been baptized Mary Ann, or something like that. Hi, Lola, I replied, coming up the steps with my packages. I did something you may not like, she said. My guess is there are many things she does that would fit that description, but I just raised my eyebrows in silent query. You're a friend, she said, with a devilish grin. He locked himself out. I let him back into the flat. You what? I heard him leave, you know. The stairs are noisy, even when carpeting. And I saw him go into the park. Poor guy. I guess he's just afraid of dogs. I don't know what this is turning into, but I like it. Really? Well, he was barely inside the park when one of the walkers came by. I suppose he had half a dozen dogs on leashes, but barking and carrying on. Your friend was up a tree in about a second flat, that old big tree with the gnarly branches, and he didn't come down for about 10 minutes. Then I heard him at the gate, and he looked so upset. Well, I know the two of you were arguing earlier, but I thought you wouldn't mind. I stood there, trying to take it all in. But he has his own key, I felt like saying. And then I thought, maybe he doesn't. You don't mind, do you? She prodded. No, that's fine. Sorry you were disturbed, I said, though in fact she was nosy. He's awfully good looking, she said. Reminds me of someone famous. Really? I said. What would I be doing with someone famous? That's what I said to myself, she laughed and closed the door. Bitch. I stood there for a moment before opening mine, wondering what I would find. Then I heard Shadow's call and saw his little whiskered face looking at me through the glass. He cat-chattered all the way up the stairs, so I gave him supper right away. I looked around for Samwise, but I didn't really expect to see him.